you ever had a bill show up that you thought was wrong? Maybe it was a medical bill, maybe it was a tax bill, maybe it was a late fee or penalty where you said, wait a second, I already paid what I owe. What is this? Now imagine that same dispute ends up with the government literally taking your house. I'm not talking about putting a lien on it or charging a penalty. They sell your house. This is what happened in a case that went to the United States Supreme Court. The case is Pung v. Isabella County, and it was just decided. And it is one of those cases where the facts are so frustrating that you almost have to stop and ask, how did this even happen? Before we get into it, let me know in the comments. If somebody allegedly owes a couple $1,000s in property taxes on a house that is worth $200,000, it's worth 100 times that amount, what should happen? Should the government be able to just take the whole property and foreclose on it and keep all of the money? Or should they be able to just go and foreclose on it and sell it at a fire sale and give the owner whatever they got at the fire sale after those taxes are paid? Or should the property owner get fair market value? Heck, if the house is worth $200,000 and I sell it at a fire sale, I might be getting half that. Because this case raises all of those questions. Just put it in the comments what you think. And let me go over the facts here. Now, in 1991, a gentleman by the name of Scott Pung bought a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a place called Isabella County, Michigan. We're not talking about a mansion. This wasn't some speculative investment property. It was the family home. The Pungs actually lived there. It was their primary residence. And because it was their primary residence, they received something in Michigan called a principal residence exemption. That matters because Michigan property or taxes primary residences, they tax primary residences differently than second homes. If you qualify for the exemption, you avoid a higher rate that applies to second homes. So you just pay a little bit less if you live there. So far, pretty normal. Scott Pung passed away in 2004. His wife, Donna Marie, continued living in the home. She passed away in 2008. After that, their son, Mark, and his family continued living in the home. So in other words, the house since 1991 was the Pung's homestead. This is where they lived. The mom and dad passed away, the kids still live there. The home, however, remained in Scott Pung's estate, and that is because Donna Marie and Mark were both beneficiaries. So Mark's still alive. And according to Justice Thomas's concurrence, the property continued to be used as the family's primary residence. In other words, the house didn't change. It didn't become a vacation home. It wasn't a second home. The family was actually living there, and they kept paying the property tax bills. This is going to trip you out. In 2010, the local tax assessor, he decided, or she decided, the Pungs were no longer entitled to the principal residence exemption. Not just going forward, though. They denied it retroactively for years 2007 through 2011. Why? According to the opinion, the assessor believed the family needed to file an updated affidavit proving the home was still their primary residence. Guys, I literally just did a video on this about property taxes, and this is case in point, right? The Pungs challenged this in a Michigan tax tribunal. They said, wait a second, we're entitled to it, we lived in it, we shouldn't have to pay the increased tax, and they won. The tribunal said they did not owe the additional second home taxes. They only owed the original primary residence taxes that had already been paid. At that point, most people are probably thinking, okay, they went to court, they won, it's over. But it's not over. In 2012, the assessor imposes what eventually becomes a little over $2,200. I think it was $2,242 of those same additional second home taxes, plus penalties, plus interest. And here's where the story gets even worse. And this is according to Justice Thomas's opinion. I guess it would be a concurrence because he wasn't in the majority. There was 9-0, but I'll get into that in a second. The original 2012 tax bill didn't even have the extra amount on it. It was for the primary residence. The executor, a gentleman by the name of Michael Pung, went to the township office with a check to pay the amount shown on the bill. The clerk said, oh, hold on. Not only is there this, but we think there's an extra amount that you should be paying. Michael said, we don't owe it. He had Mark, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Pung, who was living in the home, come in with his driver's license to show that this was his primary residence. Remember, he's the sole beneficiary of the estate. He's living there. He showed this is my primary residence. They paid, after they did that, they paid the proper amount that was actually printed on the tax bill. But the county treated the property as delinquent anyway, and they started foreclosure proceedings. The family said they never even got the foreclosure notices until after the redemption deadline. In other words, they just went through, the county just sold it. The trial court initially set aside the foreclosure because the county should have done more to notify him, but the county appealed and won, and eventually in 2018, the Pungs lost title to their home. So think about this. Dad dies in 2004, mom dies in 2008, the son and his family keep living there. In 2010, the assessor retroactively says, we're going to charge you a bunch of taxes. The Pungs challenge it, they win. 2012, county's back at it again, and years later, the family loses the entire house over $2,242. The county sells the home at an auction, and if you've ever gone to these county auctions, you know they're not getting top dollar. They're just, boom, fire sale. They sold it at auction for $76,000. I think it was $76,008, like $76,008. But the property tax had been assessed for tax purposes. Let's think it was $194,400. So, by the way, just to keep that number, I'm just going to say $195,000 because less than 18 months after the auction, remember the assessed value was at about $195,000. They sell it for $76,000. Within 18 months after the auction, the buyer at the auction who bought it for $76,000 sells it, you guessed it, for $195,000. So the big question became this. When the government takes and sells your property for unpaid taxes, what compensation is owed to you? Is it the fair market value of the home? Is it the assessed value of the home? Or is it the auction price they actually receive? And that's really the legal issue that the Supreme Court addressed. And now this is where I want to be precise. Pungs didn't get a big victory. It did get remanded, but it wasn't a huge victory. A lot of people are going to say, the Supreme Court ruled that the owner gets fair market value, and that is not what they held. The majority said that the tax sale context, the baseline for just compensation where the government takes something from you, is the auction sale price, not a hypothetical fair market value, at least when the sale, the auction, is properly conducted. And that's an important limitation. The court did not say the Pungs automatically get the $194,000 or whatever the assessed value is, or the $195,000 that it sold for. The court did not say that the resale price controls. The court did not say every tax foreclosure has to be measured by fair market value. No. Instead, the court said history supports the rule that when a government sells property to collect taxes, the former owner is entitled to the surplus proceeds from the sale. Some places actually used to try to keep the surplus too. I'm not kidding you. There's actually a case on this I'll mention in a second. But if they sold it for $200,000, the property sells for the property taxes are $2,200. The property sells for, let's say, $76,000 at auction. There's some counties that used to try to keep the whole $76,000. They would keep the whole dollar amount. You only owed $2,000. They sell it for $76,000. County keeps the whole thing. There was a Supreme Court decision called Tyler v. Hennepin County. The case was about the county trying to keep the surplus. And again, the Supreme Court stepped in and created what they call the Tyler Rule. The government says you cannot keep the excess proceeds. You only get paid what you're owed, and then you give the rest to the family that you took their property. So the court here, in the Pung case, they vacated and remanded the case, not on that fair market value rule, not because the county kept the surplus. They gave it to the Pungs. But because the majority, they left open whether the sale was fairly conducted in light of the historical tax sale practice. So the case decided two questions. It was really, there was a takings fair market value issue, and the court says, hey, we got to make sure that the sale was done right, because $76,000 is like their head scratching. Seems like it's off when the house was really worth $200,000. Doesn't mean that the Pungs are going to win. It just means that they go back and said, make sure that the government did this right. But the court also held that there was an excessive fines clause on the Eighth Amendment that does not require returning more than the surplus proceeds as well. So even though this sounds crazy, $2,000 bill, and you sell it for $76,000, it sounds like this is just out of whack. Like, why would you force the sale of something, the house, over a $2,000 bill? That just seems really excessive. But they said, hey, as long as you're giving back the surplus, they didn't really hit on that. What they did hit on is whether the sale was done correctly. And that's where the facts are going to matter. That if the tax was not owed, if the family won in the tax tribunal, if the tax bill did not show the extra amount, if the family didn't receive adequate notice, if the county persisted anyway, then this may not be a clean, ordinary tax sale. But the court only focused on the sale. Justice Thomas, in a separate concurrence, note, by the way, this was 9-0 in the majority opinion, but they didn't get as deep as Justice Thomas. Justice Thomas pointed out that the whole process the county went through had issues. I mean, it sounds pretty messed up that this family had their house taken from them. But that wasn't the majority opinion. The opinion of the court is basically, hey, the Supreme Court did not give homeowners this broad fair market value rule. I don't care what other people write about, that's not what they did. But they also didn't give counties or local municipalities a blank check to just run unfair tax sales and hide behind the auction price either. And that's the key takeaway, and this is a big one, because most disasters, they don't start off as disasters. They sometimes start really small. Like in this case, the tax exemption got removed. They said, hey, a form wasn't filed. Notice apparently is going to the wrong place. Family members have passed away. There's an estate, it's open. The property stays titled in that old estate name instead of giving it to the son. And before anybody realizes how serious it is, a $2,200 problem becomes a $200,000 problem. And that's why I talk so much about keeping your affairs organized. You need to know how your properties are titled. You need to know where they're receiving the mail. You need to know whether your exemptions are still in place. You need to know what happened when somebody dies. Sometimes the county does things and you're not even aware of them, and that's what makes this case so disturbing. This wasn't somebody, the Pungs weren't gaming the system. This was a family home. Mom and dad died. The family kept living there. They fought the tax issues and the family won, yet they still lost the home. Now for real estate investors, there's another lesson. Don't ignore small tax issues. If you own rentals in multiple states, it's easy, super easy, to miss a property tax notice. It's easy for the mail to go to some old address or go to the property address where there's tenants. It's easy for a county to send something to the wrong party. If you're holding this in an LLC or trust, please use a third-party address, like a registered agent address or a corporate mailbox like we do here. So notices don't go to a home that you are not living in. Your tenants may just go whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Here comes a notice, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And if you're not watching, the county may not care that the underlying amount is small compared to the value of the property. they're going to follow their process. And you may be stuck fighting after the damage is done. So here's practical action item. Pull the property tax records on your properties. Make sure that the property has the right mailing address. Make sure that your exemptions are correct. Make sure your estate plan matches up with your property ownership, and make sure someone knows where the tax bills go if you die or become incapacitated. And if a family member has passed away in your family and the property is sitting in a estate, don't just assume everything is fine. Please verify it, because the Pung case shows how quickly a small administrative issue can become a catastrophic property rights issue. Now, the Supreme Court here stepped in, but not in the way a lot of people expected. It did not say you always get that fair market value. What they did say is that auction price is generally the baseline for a fairly conducted tax sale. But they left it open here as whether that sale was fair. There were so many issues. And that's where that fight's going to continue. And frankly, that's where the real story is, because the deeper question is not just how much compensation is owed after the government takes your house. The deeper question is how a family ends up losing a house over a tax debt that may or not have been owed in the first place. And that really should bother everybody, whether you're a homeowner, a landlord, an investor, somebody who's helping aging parents deal with property and estate issues. This could be troubling. So share this with anybody you know who might be going through this, because nobody thinks this type of stuff can happen to them till it does.